psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Krumbaugh, the CEO of PhishFirewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior so you won't click.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today, I'm here with Tyler Healy, the CISO of DigitalOcean. Tyler, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, Joshua. Thanks for having me on. So I'm a security professional, 20 years in the field. Started off in the defense and federal side of things, transitioned into working with telecom and ISPs, and then spent a little time with life sciences companies before joining DigitalOcean 7 years ago, which is surprising to say. I feel like I've beat the CISO tenure by just a little bit of a margin at this point.
Quite a bit of a margin at this point, I would think. 7 years, that's a long time for a CISO.
Yeah, well, I started off as the director of security engineering, and then I guess graduated into the CISO role as we turned the corner into being a public company.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's been a good run.
Yeah, so you said you got in the federal space. What did that look like? How did you get your, I guess, feet wet in cybersecurity?
Yeah, a lot of DISA stigs. For those who are familiar,
so
that's
only the absolute most fun thing you could possibly do.
Exactly. Yeah, there's this thing back then called Gold Disk. It might still be around, but
stigs
yeah, it was
still definitely
very
exist.
heavily control compliance focused. DISA stigs. I spent some time working with McAfee ePolicy Orchestrator back when that was being rolled out through that environment. So yeah.
Yeah, that's like a blast from the past there.
It really is. Yes. Yeah, I still have scars, and I still think about it. I mean,
I still have
always
scars.
yeah. It's
I
always
remember
good to
IBM had this reporting tool that I had to use while I was at Morgan Stanley. And I mean, you could get 1,000 layers deep into a single record, and it was impossible to find anything. I forget the name of the tool, but it was just terrible. I felt the exact same way about that tool. Just every time I had to log in, I was like, no, God, no, please. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's unfortunately the double-edged sword of security in terms of the way people think about it, which is
yeah.
even as a security professional in the space, dealing with the level of pain that comes with some of the compliance regimes that are out there, or the super strict, heavily regulated areas. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think people sometimes cringe a little bit who are not in security when they think about having to engage with security, is that there's this heavily checklist mindset that I think that is important to break out of. And yeah, I mean, I definitely carry that feedback even to myself on a daily basis of, I don't want to be out there pushing DISA stigs into the environment. More about connecting with the people around us and figuring out how to help solve their problems rather than just throw checklists their way.
I couldn't agree more. And I do think that our industry has taken what I think is a really positive turn, and it went from security is the most important thing, which it's not that security isn't very important, but the business is very important as well. And so I think we've struck a better balance as of late. And one of the things that I really like is the trend in security, particularly by vendors, to make their products less intrusive and a little bit more transparent, sort of like the TSA, where they don't really get in your way. They just are there for show more than anything. Sorry, TSA, if anybody's listening. Um, but I mean, I think that that trend is really good, and as we start thinking more and more about user experience and packaging that into cybersecurity, whether it's at a product level or it's at, just a deployment level, I think that makes a really big difference.
Really does. Yeah. I mean, paved paths are the way to go. And I mean, the TSA example is it's kind of a funny one because I think back of traveling like 15 years ago and just, how painful it was. And obviously we have things like pre-check and global entry and all these systems, but those are the systems. Those are the paved paths. And
Yeah.
so I think those things really reflect the mindset of the user and the folks who you're working with. And certainly, the same applies within the security space. I think we did our full hardware token rollout. I mean, we've been using YubiKeys for years, but requiring it everywhere, I think, was last August timeframe, maybe a little bit
Wow.
before. And we were a little bit afraid that it was not going to be well received. But actually, what we found is users and employees across the
It
company
made it easier for them,
now
right?
love it. Yeah, exactly. Now they're like, I don't have to pull out my phone. I don't have to accept a
It was the
push
same for us
notification.
when
I
we
can just
deployed
have something.
passkeys.
Yeah,
Exact same thing where everyone, well, I'm not gonna lie, the help desk got beat up for a little while getting people set up. But once we had everyone set up on it, everyone loved it because now all of a sudden you don't have to remember that password anymore. You don't have to change that password every 90 days. There's a lot of benefits that come from it, aside from us just being more secure.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, 100%. And it's funny because you mentioned help desk, and one of the things that's interesting about the changing role of security in CISOs and companies, and same for me, is that I now have IT rolls up through the CISO organization at DigitalOcean. That happened about 3 or 4
Wow.
years ago, and I think that's a trend that's happening quite a bit more. It's almost like things have flipped where prior
Yeah, we
security
used to
was.
complain and that never happened, right? "Oh,
Exactly.
we're just the
Yes.
redheaded stepchild."
That's right. Yeah, and it's great because I mean, I have a fantastic relationship with the IT leader and the IT team, and it's awesome because we really have shared goals and we think about things in the same
Yeah,
way. And at this point, one of the hardest problems to solve with enterprise IT is just security. And so having the really tight relationship between things like the onboarding and offboarding flow, access management, automating roles and privileges as best as we can to make sure that we're
yeah.
not getting in the way of people onboarding, but at the same time being secure. Like all of those things are IT and security really sitting in the same room in the same shop, working through those problems together.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, I mean, I look at what we did for our developers and our developers needed this higher level of access, but we didn't just want to, have them blowing away security at every corner. And what we were able to do is basically give them the ability to make any change they want to their computer, and it'll almost not immediately, but it'll overnight be wiped back to the more secure setting, no matter what they've done. And I think it's compromises like that you can do to really,
Yes.
keep security there, but also give them the ability to get their job done.
Yeah, yeah, and I echo the sentiment that vendors are thinking a lot more about that these days than where we were before. Even things like virtual environments, like you said, they could wipe clean at the end of the day. I mean, there was a long period of time where we were running our support folks who are really the front line with the customer and therefore most exposed when it comes to things like phishing
Yeah.
and social engineering, operating in virtual environments that were extremely well locked down, but still gave them the flexibility to be able to do their job. And yeah, those things have all become possible because I think of the fusion of thinking between what makes a successful and fast and nimble organization be able to function, but still do so in a secure manner.
Yeah. No, I agree. So to that point, I think you may have a little bit of a unique perspective here with where you're at working with DigitalOcean. So, how do you help customers that may not know anything about security be more secure and not, I don't know, make massive mistakes that'll cause them to just get breached in a second when they use your solutions
Yeah,
without getting in
as a
their way.
and that is extremely, yeah, it's a delicate area and a delicate balance because for those who aren't familiar, DigitalOcean is an infrastructure and platform as a service provider. And so as a public cloud, there's this idea of the shared responsibility model, which is that, we only see, touch, influence things really up through like the hypervisor logical boundary between us and the tenants that are running on top of it. So it's, as
Yeah.
an entirely virtualized environment, we don't peek into or influence or affect customer workloads. I mean, it changes when you go further up the stack, right? In a PaaS environment, we have more control in that space, and customers expect us to have that control and provide them more features.
Makes sense.
But for customers who are just kind of running pure virtualized infrastructure, they can build whatever they want on that platform. And unfortunately, to your point, sometimes they are not so safe with their choices. And so it's minor influences along the way that don't affect the customer journey, but that also affect the good secure outcome. For example, like just not using password-based auth for SSH as a default, and really requiring key-based auth as a default, and
Makes
as
sense.
kind of our go forward in tutorials. And we have like a how to secure infrastructure top 10. It's probably one of the more viewed product documentation on our PDocs site. So there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of customer communication, but getting in front of it technically is still somewhat of a challenge. And I think that's one of the challenges that another hat that I'm starting to put on within the company is figure out how to bring security products and how to embed better security features into what we already have built. So we have things like
Yeah.
per bucket keys that are starting to roll out, better role-based access and functional access control that customers can control. So it's this journey that DigitalOcean has really been on, of going from what I would consider kind of like a virtual private server style cloud. At least when I joined back in 2018, the primary product was really just a compute product. And now
I used
we've
to use
gone,
it back then
yeah,
for penetration testing all the
exactly.
time. So,
Yep.
and I
That's still,
appreciated that you didn't really look too closely at what we did.
yeah. And we managing abuse on the platforms, I could talk about that for hours. It is such a unique and challenging problem space. And it is a big piece of it, going between like who's a good customer who's been compromised, who's a security researcher who's just using our platform to, test
Yeah,
something that they
yeah.
legitimately should be able to, who's a bad actor who's just here to blow stuff up and cause problems on the internet. It's a difficult element to navigate. But what we're really trying to do is
I'll
make
bet
sure that our good customers are
go ahead.
protecting themselves. But yeah, yeah,
I was just gonna say we almost ended up suing a vendor, because they saw all of our phishing domains. We do a lot of, phishing simulations and security awareness training, and so,
yeah.
this is an email provider, or an API-based email provider, and they see our domains, they don't even ask us, and they just shut down our server on the same day that we moved into production on that
Wow.
particular, server. It caused a bunch of issues. I mean, that I won't even get into it, but I can imagine it's a balancing act, and I know they were, just appalled that the abuse department did that without running any checks first, but, I
Yeah.
think at the exact same time, it is a balancing act because for every one that might be legit, you probably do have 10 or 20 that are, bad actors.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I mean, we actually, speaking of ways to influence the organizations, it's something we hold ourselves to, which is metric and measure these things, which is, we measure false positives. We measure when we've done something wrong that's impacted the customer experience. And I mean, the goal is really like 0.01% is really our goal in terms of false positives. It's not even 1 in 20, it's like 1 in 1,000 that we're really trying to hold ourselves to
Yeah.
make sure that the customer experience is seamless throughout, while still also having a metric on the other side, which says how much abuse is coming from our platform, what does our IP reputation look like, and so we're kind of measuring this thing where you've got bumper rails on both sides to make sure that we're not straying in either direction of overcompensating for fraud and abuse while still making sure that we have provide a secure experience for
Well, and
our
if you have too
customers.
much, then your reputation is just gonna go down the drain, and it's
Exactly.
gonna cause a problem for all of your customers, so
Yep.
it really
100%.
is a balancing act. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people don't understand just how much things like that are walking that tightrope, if you will.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
well,
Exactly.
let's move on. So just switching subjects a little bit, one of my favorite things to talk about is how do we really drive culture change within an organization? And how do we get people to put or to have that security first mindset? With that, before I go into any specifics around there, why don't I just turn it over to you? I'm sure you have some opinions about that. What are they?
Yeah. I am a huge proponent of a connective security team into the organization. You have to understand the business. You have to understand who you're working with, speak the language, and really establish shared and common goals before you can start really influencing the organization overall. And so that kind of goes back to what we were talking a little bit at the top about not just chucking problems over the fence and expecting people to be able to just go solve them, but really sitting side by side with them, and understanding what their motivations are. Because the best way to influence an organization is to understand what's motivating them. So for customer success teams and support teams, oftentimes it's ticket turnaround times, it's queue times. For marketing teams, it's how many customers are able to walk in the front door, which directly leads to the whole fraud and abuse problem,
Yeah.
at least in our circumstance. For engineers, it's velocity. How fast can I get a product out, but that's safe? And so every single one of those facets requires a security team to show up in a different way. And I think that that's really one of the hardest parts and probably the most rewarding part. And when you get it right, you can really see the results in the organization is shaping the conversation and shaping what you're measuring and why you're measuring it and how you're talking about the problem, depending on who your audience is and what their goals are. Because if you can show up and say, I'm going to help you with your goals and we're going to work on this together and we're going to establish kind of some guardrails and some metrics to measure how good we are in this space rather than just kind of doing point by point check-ins and whapping people over the head. I think that that's probably the most powerful way to shape the results for an organization.
I think you also learn a lot from those relationships. You
Yes.
learn about risk that you would be unaware of otherwise. And,
100%.
and just I think it also makes those people more likely to come to you instead of trying to go around you when you have that relationship.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it pays dividends. I mean, both in the circumstance of being able to see things earlier, like you said, things go wrong. People click phishing emails. I
Yeah.
mean, I had one today from a fairly, I won't name names, I won't throw them under the bus, but from a fairly uh, high ranking individual at our company clicked a phishing email. It was one of those DocuSign ones that's been going around. Unfortunately, it's just hard to keep up on all the various channels that these things are coming through. And it was a
And the
quick
DocuSign
click.
ones are nasty because we all get
Yeah.
DocuSign. I mean, if
Yes.
you're in any sort of leadership position, you are used to getting DocuSign all the time.
Yes. Yep, exactly. But this is someone that I work very closely with. We have a great relationship. We solve, um, problems in a shared way. Like I can speak the language of what he's thinking about and what he's worried about. So then when he brings something to me like this, it's just a very quick conversation, easy. I mean, we had our forensics team jump into it and make sure that everything was all kosher from nothing detonated and that kind of thing. But it's just the idea of that someone's like, oh, I did something wrong. Of course, I expect that at a leadership layer, but even further down in the organization, the idea that I want to come have a conversation with security. We have people do that all the time. People will see something in logs, for example. If we have our observability teams like, that looks like it might be, a piece of customer data or it's been a while since we've had this. You should be things like logging credentials or something along those
Yeah.
lines where it has happened in the past. And instead of hiding from the problem, bringing it forward, it's that ability to get in front of problems that really, I think, sets a solid security organization apart from one that's just kind of chasing the bus all the time.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that we have to foster relationships and not just for the fact that we're going to learn about the risk and we're going to have them more likely to come to us or even the fact that they're more likely to tell us about a problem because that
Yeah,
same fish click maybe this one was benign and there was no big deal, but that same fish click could have been had malware behind it,
yep,
and the longer they wait to tell us, the more detrimental it can be. And,
100%.
you can measure dollars and cents or the cost of a breach in seconds. And that's the way I say it. Every second longer that they're in there,
That's it.
you're adding dollars, man.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because the amount of lateral movement that can occur, just someone's going to sniff around for a couple of days. I mean, usually what we see is a few days of recon style approach. If somebody's going to get into environment, that's a crucial window, because if
Yeah.
you know during that point in time before they've gained persistence or gone lateral, then that is a much different scenario than where you're chasing someone 3 months down the line. So that's
Oh,
that's a
absolutely.
huge difference. Yeah.
It is. And I think a lot of the times when you're initially compromised, more often than not, it's part of mass operations. They don't know what they have yet. You
Yep.
could have a certain amount of time to get rid of them before anyone actually, knows what they have. And you also have a lot of access brokers out there, which I think is
Yep.
another part that a lot of people don't think about, is that, most of these ransomware groups, they don't get into your organization. Somebody else gets in and they sell that access for $500, and those ransomware groups use that to go pop you.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and that's the usual attack net chain, and I think that's gonna get even more popular with agentic AI on the attacker side, which is that they're
Oh,
gonna be
absolutely.
constantly go
The
yeah, I
script
mean, it's already
kiddies aren't, they're actually able to do so much more than they were
yes.
before, because all of a sudden, well, what tools in Kali can I use to do this?
Yep.
Okay, and what type of, give me some command line examples of how to do that. And here's the target. Okay, and do this now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's no time at all, and we already have tools like Open Interpreter, which
Yep.
allows you to integrate, any large language model into the command line, so directly into Kali, if you want, and I've used it in Kali. It's remarkably effective. You just have to start by telling it that it is in a lab and that, this is for a job interview or whatever. Um because if you
Nice.
don't start with that first prompt convincing it to do things, malicious, then you won't get anything, but if you get it to out of the first prompt, it'll continue as long as you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember when Metasploit made all that super easy, right? I mean, that was just like
Yeah.
the
Well,
ability to go,
now
and this
you
is
can
like the
integrate
next
AI
level
into
up.
Metasploit, even
Yeah,
better.
exactly. Yeah, I remember, yeah, so it's just like you said, before it was you kinda had to have at least some coding skills. I mean, that's why they're called script kiddies, right? You used to
Yeah.
have to write scripts to be able to do the job if you wanted to. Now it's you don't even need that. At this point, it's a can you prompt something effectively? It's just a completely different ballgame.
Well,
So, and I
and I
don't
don't
think we
even know that
can
you need the Kali tools, because
yeah,
honestly, you can get most of these tools aren't really that comprehensive, and AI can code so quickly
yep,
that a lot of these things that you would have used tools for before, you can just write code for on the fly too.
yeah, yeah, and I don't even think we've started to see that scratch the surface. I mean, there is a lot of history and there's just a lot of like, bot driven activity and automation. We are very, I don't even know what percentage of internet traffic I would consider malicious or bot traffic, but is a high percentage.
It's like
Um,
90%. It's like bot.
yes.
Well, I call it white noise. I mean,
Yeah.
you turn on the internet, you're gonna immediately get hit. I saw
Yep.
some person's post going viral on LinkedIn today because they put a honeypot on the internet and just visualized the attack over 24 hours, and
Yeah.
everyone's like, "Oh my god,"
It's
but it
it's
really
within
is that
seconds.
bad.
Yeah. It is, it is, and so, it's the volume is not necessarily new, like, with agentic AI, it's not gonna be I think it's gonna be the accuracy and the access that comes out of it. Um,
Well, I am
you know
curious because I read that I think it was Amazon. It was either Amazon or IBM, but one of those had an 800% increase in attacks hitting their cloud infrastructure in 2024. I'm curious, did you see any sort of increase like that?
yeah, I mean, it I feel like it's just always been in it has I don't think it was to that would you say 800%? I don't
Yeah, it
think it
was
was to that
ridiculously
degree.
large number.
Yeah, no, I don't think we saw it to that degree, but in terms of I mean, we measure both sides, right? We kinda have the inbound attack traffic and then the outbound,
Yeah, fair enough.
component of it as
Outbound
well.
must be rich with
Rewards.
data.
Yes, yeah, and so I think a lot of it, um, again, I think it depends on like geopolitical activities and other things that are going on in the world where you see different things that ebb and flow in that way. And I'd be curious what they meant by attack traffic, right? Because port scans, I think, unfortunately, according to the SEC guidance, something like port scans falls under a cyber attack relative to what they consider a potential incident. But so I honestly think it comes down to how companies measure it and want to talk about it in terms of how they frame things up. But I'd prefer to think about it from the level of potential impact to either our customers or outbound to the rest of the internet.
Yeah, and I would argue it is not a cyber attack until you see a port scan on your internal network now.
Yeah,
It's on the
exactly.
inside, now I'm getting nervous, but, if it's hitting my perimeter, I mean, that's all day, every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, okay,
Exactly.
so, switching gears just a little bit,
Yeah.
I like to ask everybody that well, I guess not everybody, but most people that join the show, one simple question, carrot or stick. If you could only use one to really drive culture change, which would it be?
Uh, Carrot.
Why?
Simple answer. But yeah, let me elaborate a little bit. So, I think a lot of it comes down to the idea of shared goals, which is the making it palatable and always a win-win when you're working with someone. So moving from security departments of no to security department of yes, but it's usually yes with guidance. It's yes with how can we make this work for you? How can we make this, secure and safe and actually probably potentially even better for customers? And a lot of that comes down to putting the power of decision making and choice into the hands of the other folks that you're working with. And what I mean by that is, security always reserves the right to uh, to block a decision. I mean, that is just something that being in the seat that we're in relative to protecting the business and protecting our customers, there can be decisions that will be extremely egregious, and it is our responsibilities to step in front of that and say,
Like when my
can't.
developers wanted to expose a database port to the internet?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There are certain design decisions where you're just like, "That's," but almost, I say almost everyone because it's not 100% true. Almost everyone is reasonable enough to have the conversation to say, "All right, we can redirect in a healthy way."
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to putting that power in the hands of the folks that you're working with because they're often the same way security is, but juggling 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different priorities in terms of what they wanna focus on and what their goals are. So we just to give you an example or a quick story on that is, a couple years ago, we introduced this concept called security debt,
Okay.
which is that relative to security vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities get announced. They have CVEs and CVSS scores in terms of the general impact. We have an internal CRR rating within our environment that we evaluate whatever CVE and the CVSS might be and understand whether it really actually has impact on our environment and which part of our environment to contextualize it. At the end of the day, you still end up with a score, right? And the
Mhm.
typical way to solve that is you make a JIRA ticket, put a score on it, chuck it over the wall and say, this one's high, so you got to fix it in 48 hours, or this one's medium, so you got 3 months. Um, that is not a great experience from an engineer standpoint and often doesn't allow them to make trade-offs relative to what's going on in their world and in their environment. And again, things that are super high vulnerability, we're gonna get together with the right teams and solve it right then and there. But beyond that piece, it's the idea of security debt is that you can carry a backlog of vulnerabilities with you the same way you would feature debt or other tech debt and availability debt, and pay it down when you think it's the right time to pay it down. And then we set thresholds in terms of, okay, depending on what part of the environment it's in, like our IAM customer IAM service and RBAC service is going to have a pretty low threshold, but some more internal services that might not be as customer exposed might have a slightly higher threshold. And then the debt accrues over time the same way that you might have credit card debt build up, and eventually you have to pay it down. But you get the choice of when you pay it down because maybe you don't want to. Maybe you've got a big expense that you need at that point in time, and it makes sense to take on that debt at that point in time. And then
Yeah.
giving those teams the flexibility to make those decisions for themselves is so empowering compared to just chucking a Jira over the wall. And so
Well,
we
I
found
think
that to be a
that's a
really
better
effective.
approach anyway, because when I was an ethical hacker, it was rarely the critical or high vulnerabilities that gave us the keys to the kingdom. It was the moderate vulnerabilities that got ignored in favor of all the criticals and the highs that we
Yes.
were able to exploit. And you combine a couple moderate vulnerabilities, and that can turn into a critical very quickly.
That's right. Yeah, it's all about context and
Yeah.
understanding. And again, that goes back to understanding your organization, understanding the team. So one of the things that we do on the product security side of the world is we have folks who really specialize in different parts of the stack. I mean, we have someone who's extremely well versed in hardware level vulnerabilities or kernel level vulnerabilities. So for things like Spectre and
Yeah.
Meltdown, back when hardware vulns were kind of a big deal for clouds. I mean, they still are, but they were a
Yeah, but it
massive.
blew up, what, 3 years ago or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, it's actually I think it's
Or
been some
may have
maybe
been
even
longer
more.
even.
Either way, they keep it, they
I'm
continue
old,
to come out,
times
but
just
yeah. I know it all blends together at some point.
it really
But,
does.
we got someone who's really smart in that space, and then we have someone who's, closer to the PaaS layer, application layer security, and so you just start to figure out how to align the right skill set and mindset to different parts of the organization where you can have that shared context and that shared communication. And
Makes
it
sense.
definitely goes a long way. And then just to bring that back to the whole idea of carrot, I mean, of course, you have to have stick once in a while if somebody is doing something egregious over and over again. Someone's torrenting from their work laptop, and you've told them stop, and they do it again. Like there's just there are no
I told
excuses
you
for
no
that.
more Tor.
That's And so, there's just sometimes when that becomes a problem and you have to turn it into more of a personnel issue. But when it comes to the day to day and just working with an organization, figuring out what their motivations are and getting in that same box and having the shared same goals and shared set of ideas and metrics allows them to feel free from the burdens of security and kind of go it at their own pace. That makes sense for the
Yeah,
closing what they need to close, relative to their priorities.
makes sense. So let's switch over to training for a little bit because
Yeah.
security awareness training for so long, in my opinion, has been nothing more than a checkbox activity where we do it because we have compliance requirements or insurance requirements that say we have to do it, but we don't really expect to get anything out of it. We don't really try to get anything out of it. And so a part of the goal of this podcast is really to share best practices around training and how we can do better and actually expect to see real results. Do you have any tips for the listeners there?
Um, I think just make everything as real time as possible. And what I mean by that is, we have our annual security awareness training, and new joiners take it. We actually made our own. We
Okay.
really did not like anything out of the box for the most part. I mean, we went to a couple different vendors, but like what I'm talking about, the things that come with Workday or other LinkedIn Learning. We looked at all those. And we
Oh,
said, oh,
you were going for that boring once a year
yes,
sort of LMS
yeah.
stuff. Okay.
We saw the LMS stuff, and we tried to attach to it because
Hmm.
that's the way the rest of the training in the organization
Yeah.
goes. And we all
There's a lot
decided
of studies
not
that have
to go
shown that
to.
does zero good.
Yeah, it can even be harmful because then
Yeah.
people generally build a negative view. So we rolled our own. We found different YouTube videos. We had people come and talk. We have our own set of like quizzes and trainings throughout, and so we've found it to be a bit more effective, and we get feedback on the training too. And generally speaking, people do like it. But that doesn't necessarily solve the point you're making, which is that at the end of the day, that's once a year. That at least people know where to report phishing, phishing at DigitalOcean.com or whatever. That it gives them the right, background mindset to some degree.
Yeah.
But this stuff happens more in real time. So, for example, a few months ago, and it's actually happened over the past few years, and it pops up like every 6 to 8 months, is someone on LinkedIn is going around basically saying, "Hey, I'll pay you $10,000 this LinkedIn messages to DO employees saying, I'll pay you $10,000 if you gave me
I've
access
heard about
to your
those
account.
scams a bunch of times. Rarely have I had a chance to see one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be harassing you after this podcast to send me that email.
Will do. Yeah. But it's that real time we're a huge Slack culture. So
Yeah,
basically what we do is the moment we see that, you go to the announcements channel, I mean, security channel, I think is the other place with pretty much every employee in there and just people know about it. And, there was a point in time when we were doing, I don't know if you're familiar with Among Us, that game that was super popular during COVID. It's like a multiplayer whodunit sort of game, where you're supposed
no.
to figure out basically who the imposter is in your
Okay.
group. And we weaved that into our security training and made that kind of part of the security culture. So then when somebody would report a phishing email or kind of this LinkedIn thing I'm referencing, all the emojis would pop up of like the imposter in the security training. So just kind of making it a little more fun and a little more gamified and a little more connective to what people are thinking about at that point in time.
Well,
And
I
then
think
just being on
oh,
the
go ahead.
spot with it, Slack culture definitely helps with that. But yeah,
Yeah. No, I like I think a couple of things that I take away from what you said there. Number one, when you throw stuff into Slack and you make it a little bit more real time and continuous, it's more front of mind because people are constantly hearing about it. But the other
yeah,
critical thing that I see there is when somebody goes in and let's say posts that LinkedIn thing in Slack where your other coworkers can see it, all of a sudden this becomes very real. It's not an
yes,
AWS employee that's being targeted and offered this job. No, it's one of their coworkers, one of their peers that had it happen. And it becomes very real now. And I think that is part of what helps drive engagement is making that attack more real and sharing those stories about when it hit accounting or when it hit the IT team or when it hit the help desk or whoever it happens to be.
100%. Yeah, and being super encouraging when people report those things, because then
Yeah.
we just saw the follow-on of a number of people chiming back in and saying, "Hey, I got one too. Here's what this message looked like, or it came from this particular email address," which then helps us go back to LinkedIn and report the fact that they've got, an abuse problem on their end to go solve for. And that quick turnaround time, from the time, like we were talking about earlier, that time that somebody reports something to the time that you can actually take action on it, the more you can shrink that window, the more successful you're going to be. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that the cultural element of making it feel good to talk about those things rather than scary, I think is definitely
Yeah.
the way to go.
Well, another key thing that you pointed out there is praising people. Hey, you've reported
Yeah,
this. Now we praise you. It encourages others to report. It encourages that person to report more. So I think that's part of driving culture change is every time somebody does bring you something is acknowledging that and rewarding them, even if it's with nothing more than a kudos, because
yep.
people do love a good pat on the back once in a while.
Yes, they do. Yeah, for sure. And it's something that we talk about even in performance across the company at this point. I mean, it's fortunate that we have leaders who also believe in the power of safety and security for us and businesses and for our customers, and we understand the gravity of what that means, especially as being a public cloud. If we do something wrong, it's not just our business that gets impacted, it is our customers and oftentimes our customers' customers. So it's just the
Yeah.
level of gravity is well understood, but we try and keep it also light at the same time because it's how you engage with people. You can't just be the bearer of bad news at all points in time. And it has become part of the performance-based culture at DigitalOcean as well, where we talk about these sorts of things. So if who's
Yeah,
thinking
if you
about
have
it,
an
who's
outage, it
contributing.
isn't just your customers, it's your customers' customers too. Because of the
Yes,
nature of your business, 99% would be customers' customers.
exactly.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
hadn't thought about
So
that part. So no pressure, none.
oh, but it keeps it interesting. It allows us to see all of the various latest flavors of whatever attack vectors are coming. So it's kind of a funny spot, which is that we both have to be defensive for our own business, but then use our platform as almost like threat intelligence for ourselves to be able to know what
Yeah.
might be coming and how attacks are and new threat vectors are shaping up.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Well, we are almost at time here. Any, sort of final bits of advice as we wrap up the show here today?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the to just tie together a lot of the themes from the conversation is that you can't influence an organization from a place of defensiveness. I mean, you're always just showing up from a place of, something is going to go wrong if we don't do X is not a way to start a conversation. And so I think that security professionals, no matter where you are in your journey within your career, I know, especially even for myself, when I was my younger self, I was heavily focused on the technical side. I mean,
Oh,
I was
my younger self was, terrible. I was part of the problem. I'll admit this. Before I got
yes,
into security, I was really part of the problem, but then even once I got into security, man, I
yeah,
carried a big stick when I first got in.
yes, yes, and that is natural. I mean, it's part of the mindset, and it's you kind of find it within the industry. It's part of where we all have come from, and
What is
so
the
I
first
think,
thing you learn when you get into tech, though? And I think that's part of the reason it's natural. Because the first thing I learned was PEBCAC, the ID10T error, you can't patch stupid.
yep,
And it is, I mean, when you come from the help desk, that is 90% of the tickets. And so
that's
I
right.
think that because you typically start in the trenches doing,
That's right.
doing help desk or end user support, it just there's this natural I don't know, almost
Yeah,
opinion or negative
yes,
attitude that you take toward the user. But I think we have to be conscious of it so that we don't carry that into cybersecurity. And even in IT, you don't really want that because it leads to a bad experience when you call the help desk.
yeah,
But
yep.
I was a junior once too, and
Yes. Yeah, we've lived that. I mean, coming from computer science and computer engineering background, I try to stay heavily technical, but at the same time, be able to shift your mindset to meet someone where they are based on what
yeah,
their goals are. And I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is we all want to carry this stick, and sometimes we do have to use it. But I really think that the influencing from a place of shared context is super powerful in the security space. And really, again, no matter where you are in your career, it's no better time to start practicing it, early on to think about how to engage a little bit differently.
yeah. And I mean, I will. One of the things that I've had to learn again and again in my career is that sales is a critical part of your cybersecurity tool set.
Oh yeah.
And it's something I've despised and not wanted to have in my, in my, arsenal so
Hey,
many times, but you can't avoid it, and when you want to motivate people to be more secure, to come to you first, to, just do things in a different way, you have to approach it from that, that mindset.
yep.
Well, this
Yep.
has been a fabulous episode today, Tyler. I really appreciate you joining me today.
No, of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, hey, you have a great day. And for those of you joining us remotely, we'll see you later this week. Thank you.